Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a film I've had mixed feelings on my whole life. At least depending on when in my life you would ask me about my opinion. When I was in my toddler years, it was probably one of the few films I'd actually watched up to a point. It was just one of the scarier films. Ask me again when I was a little older, I'd probably say it was a great film and actually defend it against the even wilder version. Then, if you'd asked me a few years later in my pre-teen and early teen years, I'd probably tell you that the film was terrible. Then I went through my obligatory Tim Burton phase as a mid to late teen and would have said it's an amazing adaptation that is closer to the original than the wilder version, which had its own merits. And that is pretty much where I stand now. It's a classic tale of the dangers of overindulgence. However, this particular adaptation also dives into its own messages and morals while generally sticking to the original tone. I think this is in part because the director was Tim Burton, a person who you could probably argue was the best director to handle a Roald Dahl movie. But anyway, the question remains, why the fuck am I telling you all this? Because it was a major family film blockbuster from 2005. So that means there were video games based on it. Yeah, this is kind of a thing that just seemed to be popular at the time for some reason. Basically any movie, TV show, whatever that was popular would get a video game adaptation. What's weirder is that it seemed to exist in a sort of 6th gen vacuum, like as soon as the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance were discontinued, the games just started to dry up. Not that there weren't any after. Some of these can actually be pretty good. I remember Ratatouille on DS as well as Toy Story 3. But apparently the Batman Begins licensed game also inspired the Arkham series later on. But we're not talking about those games or movies, we're talking about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. On Game Boy Advance. Yes, I know nobody usually gives attention to the weird ports. If you're going to review a game, you're going to review the console version. But nobody talks about these ports, and this is the version that I have mostly played. I've not touched the console version at all. And from the sounds of it, that actually sounds like a pretty good thing. Plus, being a handheld version, it makes it generally easier for me to test a new format on as I want to do. Basically, the idea is that yes, I review the game, but I also take the time where the plot is dropped on the player to also review the movie as well. I hope I can weave between the two enough so that hopefully it's not too distracting. I don't know, let me know what you think. So let's take a peek at the game and also somewhat the movie. I should note that because of this game's level structure, that being linear with single stages for each set piece, I will be looking more in depth at each level than I may usually. I want to try and keep these videos short, but I was writing in excruciating detail, so I'll trim some fat but prepare for somewhat of a deep dive. Funnily enough, the game was developed by Digital Eclipse of all people. They did do some Atari ports up to this point, but if anything, I guess their best showcase of skill would have been that they developed GTA Advance, a prequel to GTA 3 which started as a port. I don't think this game has many plot ramifications like the other GTA 3D Universe games, but still it has a pretty decent story. Plus the game itself is actually pretty decent as well. So thankfully, we are in somewhat capable hands. The title screen is very similar to the opening credits of the movie, which are honestly an amazing setup. It's such a beautifully eerie yet exciting opening that kind of sets you up for the ride ahead. Now, less and less movies have been doing opening credits, but honestly, if every director just directed opening credits like Tim Burton did, I don't think that we'd have this problem. But loading into the game and not turning off the movie after the opening, we are greeted to Charlie Bucket. He's not a particularly special boy in terms of ability or prowess, but he is the luckiest in all the land. He just doesn't know it yet, which is code word for he's not very lucky at all. Willy Wonka decides to open his factory to whoever can find one of his 5 golden tickets he spiked his chocolate with. The game doesn't go over this quite yet, however it's not long before 4 of the tickets are found. None of them are particularly pleasant people, however. Their parents can range from being people who simply don't care enough to put their foot down, or they can even be worse than their child. Charlie makes 2 attempts for a golden ticket, however both times come up short. He overhears that the 5th golden ticket has been found by a Russian kid from 2 passing by. Also, the actors for the 2 men are both Mark Heap and Kevin Eldon acting together, which probably means that somebody working on this movie, maybe Burton himself, was a fan of Big Train, where they often acted together. Or even better, they could have been a fan of Brass Eye or even Jam. And if that's the case, that's really funny to me. In case you don't know Brass Eye or Jam, these are those shows.
This is Belgium's most popular show. It features a man on a penis trike.
I'm gonna get you fucking sacked, mate. What's your name?
It's Mr. Lizard.
Stop fucking me about!
Fucking nincompoop.
Stop it! Where are you going? Get back there! Where are you going? Get back in there! It's not that much to say! Come in there!
But enough dilly-dallying. We have to start the game somewhere, and it starts with Charlie finding a $10 note in the snow. In the film he just finds it on the ground and picks it up, but of course this is a video game, so it needs to be a bit more action-packed. To be honest, I don't think there's really anything else they could have done up to this point that would have been a good start for a video game. Well, enough from Charlie's perspective, so you might as well just take what you can and stretch it as far as you can. For a tutorial level, it's alright. It doesn't bombard you with any hazards or collectibles just yet, which this game does have. However, it does introduce you to the game's movement mechanics, especially ones that are present throughout pretty much every level, as well as different mechanics such as braking platforms, pushable objects, fans and air ducts, and slippery platforms, which only really make a couple of other appearances. I do wish the game wouldn't spell itself out as much though. There's literally a sign that just tells you to press A to jump. I know I shouldn't be expecting too much for a game that is intended for children, but at the same time, I have been spoiled by games by Valve, for example, where they try and teach you mechanics through gameplay flow. Thankfully though, it's not as intrusive as in other games, because they act similarly to the sign blocks in the 2 Mario World games. So that's alright in the end, I suppose. Grabbing the money itself as well can also be a bit of a pain in the bum. When you go and grab it, it moves to the next spot you need to grab it. But when you're on the ice, at least to me, it's a pain in the fucking arse to grab it. It feels like the collision detection just completely wanks off. And the worst part is that you can't just go ahead of the money, you have to grab it at each interval in order for it to reach the end of the stage where you can then grab it and then beat the stage. So you need to fuck about on this ice for a little bit. I mean, it's not too bad, but at the same time, it is a little bit annoying. Especially my first time around, I think I was on here for actually a decent bit of time. When you finally do collect it, it's conveniently right outside the convenience shop where you would have otherwise purchased a chocolate bar from. And of course, if you know anything about the rule of third time being a charm, plus the fact we played a whole level dedicated to getting that money, it's surely got to pay off. I mean, it just must pay off. Plus, Charlie is our protagonist. It would be a bit of a crap story if the rest of it was just Charlie waiting outside the factory gates. So now with the golden ticket we've unlocked the first main level, the chocolate room. We're given what is essentially a roll call where we find out who the other golden ticket winners are. Those being Augustus Gloop, Veruca Salt, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, whose initials conveniently spell MTV, a channel that is now dead. Of course, like I said before, none of these other children are meant to be particularly present characters that we want to relate to. They each represent nasty habits or personalities that Roald Dahl disliked, or that were just considered dickish at the time. Nobody really gives a shit about chewing gum anymore, but I'm pretty sure back in the day, it was seen as really rude to chew gum. And because of changing attitudes, some of the brats have indulgences that don't really seem as bad. And so what this film does is that it actually updates some characters in order to have more nasty personalities.
A retard figured out.
For example, Violet was always a character who would brag about her successes, however this movie turns up her arrogance to 11, and it makes her an overall overachiever under a soccer mum. Yes, a Brit just said soccer, keep your hair on. And Mike is similarly turned into a brand of insufferably arrogant. However, it's more because he's a character who is extremely logic-centric and realist in a world where that simply doesn't work. It makes sense for these two characters to be turned more insufferable, especially as they're arguably given the more extreme send-offs. However, Veruca and Augustus are also made a bit more aggressive as well.
And the future for these little fuckers?
Is not particularly bright when they enter the factory. We then finally meet Mr. Willy Wonka. In the game we just sort of finally see him, and this is sort of what happens in both the book and the older adaptation as well. In this movie, however,
Willy Wonka, the amazing chocolatier. Willy Wonka, everybody give a cheer.
yeah, I mean it does fit this adaptation particularly well, I think. We finally get to the level itself, and right off the bat I'd say it's very visually appealing. If there's one thing I had a problem with aesthetic wise in the movie, I'd say it's that the chocolate room doesn't really feel vibrant enough. I don't know, it just feels kind of macabre in the colour scheme, like everything has this sort of muted tone to it, which I think works in some rooms in the movie, but not really this one. This game, however, makes it feel like a luscious field right from the start, and makes it feel like it's springtime for Wonka. However, it's not long at all before we're in yet another cutscene. This, however, is an in-game cutscene, which we don't really see much of. Here we are introduced to the Oompa Loompas, a mysterious species from Loompaland. In the movie, it leads to what is technically the first of many flashback scenes. This one, however, complete with Johnny Depp monologuing with made-up words, which oddly reminds me of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas for that reason.
A whole galaxy of multicolored uppers, downers, screamers, laughers.
Hornswogglers and snozwangers, and those terrible, wicked wangdoodles.
But once you get locked into a serious drug collection, the tendency is to push it as far as you can.
Hang on, not yet movie, we still got the level to play. The level itself also shows promise for the game. Yeah, it's mostly not too difficult, but ultimately games are meant to be fun, and I think this does give enough of a fun factor in my opinion. This level refines some of the mechanics we saw in the first level, such as falling platforms, which now seem to be floating chocolate coins, and introduces us to some new mechanics as well. For example, there are trampoline platforms which you can move to wherever needed, which you could argue it's a bit useless, why not just have the trampolines where you need them anyway? Then again, you could argue that about most video game mechanics, why should I need to do all this stuff when the goal is right there? Ultimately, these things are just meant to pad out and also add some interactive elements, so don't really be so pessimistic about them. I still think it's quite a cool concept, and I think it flows pretty well as well. One of the cooler mechanics I think is the giant gumball. You similarly roll it to wherever you need it, however it doesn't trampoline you and just acts like a jump boost. What makes it cool, however, is the fact that you can roll on top of it, and not just that, it can also be used to traverse what are essentially lava pits. It's not actually lava, it's fudge, but it's a pit full of liquid that damages you. But it isn't all sunshine and lollipops because there are now stage hazards. At least for now they're quite easy to avoid. Some of them run on cycles, for example chocolate geysers, and you need to pass through them at the correct time, and some you just simply need to avoid. One of them even traps you, and the guide to mash the face buttons to escape has an epileptic fit. The worst hazard though I'd say is the volcano, somewhat similar to how New Super Mario Bros. Did it the following year. However, unlike that game, they don't rain down, stop for a few seconds, they'd start falling down again with an apparent volcano eruption in the background. Chocolate meteor chunks just constantly rain down on you, which isn't too bad if you're running, but when you're trying to grab the collectibles it can be a right pain in the arse. Speaking of, what I think helps flesh out all of the game's levels is the collectible element. This game does commit a little bit of a cardinal sin for me in terms of basically having what I call coin collectibles, where you have this small, somewhat common collectible similar to the coins from Mario, but you limit them, and then you make it so that you have to collect them all or a certain amount for 100%, and I generally really find these annoying in games. It basically ruined games like Mission in Snowdrift Land for me. But honestly, the fact that these aren't too well hidden, as well as the fact that there's only 25, honestly they're really bearable in this game. I actually wanted to grab them, and I didn't feel burdened by them on my playthrough. On top of that, you can collect the letters for Wonka, so they unlock mini-games, whereas collecting all of these square candies nets you photos for the Oompa Loompa Gallery. What is the Oompa Loompa Gallery? Riveting. The world's first Deep Roy gallery. It's just stills from the movie, not exactly sure what makes these so desirable except for just being something there to collect if you really want it. Adds some replay value I suppose, but honestly this game does struggle somewhat in that regard, which I'll explain why later. At least it does for me. It does somewhat relate back to how I was talking about cardinal sins in games. Anyway, while we traverse the chocolate room, we meet all sorts of people who are on the tour with us. First of all is Willy Wonka, who is literally just a guy from Theme Park. No, seriously, they look almost identical. I doubt it was intentional from anyone working on the film, but with Digital Eclipse, it could either be intentional or just a really funny coincidence. We also have Grandpa Joe, of course. He's there for moral support, and also because there probably needs to be a legal requirement for a legal guardian, especially with someone who lives in solitude. And I don't even really say that to make a joke like he could be a pervert or something. On top of meeting our friends, we also get to talk to the other golden ticket winners. They often don't really have much to say and just give you a window into how bad their attitude is. But yeah, it doesn't feel like too long, we've already reached the end of the level. If only some other levels had that problem. Still, better too short and left wanting more than left overfilled. Speaking of overfilled, Augustus zeroes in on the chocolate river. However, him bending over like that, of course he was going to fall in. Luckily, we're back to a level that's basically a continuation of what we just did. This time, however, it seemed to be a bit more fast paced, what with it chasing a fat kid in a chocolate factory. We're introduced to speed candy, which does exactly what it says on the tin. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as what we just done, but with some sort of time limits, which just seems to amount to keeping Augustus near you, otherwise he seems to drown. I know he was an arsehole, but jeez. If we do make it, however, we're too late anyway because Augustus gets sucked into the pipe and whisked away to the fudge room. And because it's a video game with one playable character, it's up to Charlie, therefore us, to save Mr. Gloop by going through the Wriggle Sweets room, a room that's mentioned in the book funnily enough but never shown in the film. And because of that, the developers had to take some creative liberties and design it for themselves. I highly doubt Tim Burton made concept art for these rooms that were never in the film. And I'd say that the developers did a pretty good job with these rooms. Some I'd argue are more in keeping with the Burton aesthetic than others, but overall I'd say they all look pretty good. Mostly. This is a room that I'd argue looks closer to something from the original 1971 movie with its use of brass and a somewhat steampunk aesthetic, but there's nothing particularly wrong with that. Again, quite a fun level, and here we're introduced to a few more mechanics. The biggest mechanics we're introduced to are both Oompa Loompas and
Technology!
So to talk about the latter first, we're introduced to levers, which you interact with by pressing B, and it causes doors to open with different gizmos such as floor fans or moving platforms to activate. You also have pressure plates which do the same, however require something or most times somebody to be on them to stay active. Then we have the Oompa Loompas themselves. You can see dancing by themselves usually. Pressing L will get them to follow you, and from there you can get them to perform a series of tasks. Usually they can enter these power wheels or whatever they are, which just act like switches. They can crawl through these small passages that are too big for you. Or you can make them stand on pressure plates to keep them active, although you're also introduced to different tools that you can give to the Oompa Loompas. And if something interactive is nearby, they can use the relevant tools and perform different tasks. For example, give them a pickaxe, and if they're next to a crystal wall, they'll smash it for you. All of these mechanics are introduced in relative vacuums, so it gives you enough space to learn them, and I think that's actually really well designed. There's also a unique section in the middle of the stage where you must grab different parts of the Wriggle Sweets machine and press B to install them. After fixing the machine, you then also get introduced to Wriggle Sweets. These are basically your offensive option. You throw these and they can be used for all manner of different things. Right now we just use them to stun enemies, however in later levels you can use them by throwing them overhead to activate levers out of reach, which is actually quite a cool concept I'd say. The level was soon over, and yeah, I'd say it's another good level. We finally reach the fudge room, where we have to save Augustus in what I guess you could consider a boss fight of sorts. Basically you need to grab little fudge chunks and throw them into the mouth of the machine. Doing so will push more chocolate into the pipe, which moves Augustus up. Keep doing that until he pops out the other end. It's not like you can just stay in one place, however, because the chocolate chunks pop out of different ends each time. It's a decent little fight. The steam vents can be an effective hazard. Even if they're more annoying than anything, I doubt you'd die to them. And with that, Augustus is saved. And the Oompa Loompas greet us with a cautionary tale. Now in the book, and I'm guessing the game as well considering it lifts the lyrics from the book, these seem to be just cautionary poems recited by the Oompa Loompas. In both film adaptations, however, they're full on musical numbers. And I'll take the time to say now that the soundtrack in this version is bloody amazing. It's basically Oingo Boingo doing a Ween impression, and that is kind of literal to an extent because it is Danny Elfman covering a wide range of song genres, with lyrics criticising negative attitudes and bad people. If you don't know who Oingo Boingo or Ween are, you've probably heard them. However, I'd say neither of those songs really paint a picture of each band, especially not Ocean Man with Ween. Before we move on, there is one thing I need to mention though. Everything that happened between Augustus going up the pipe and him popping out the other end of the fudge machine never happened in the movie. Yes, I know that it's so that you actually have something to do in the game besides just walk around the factory, but Charlie is basically made to help each of the children out of their predicaments. It's the parents of the children in trouble and some Oompa Loompas who go off to try and save them. However, all of that is off screen. In the film, Charlie sticks to the tour with the rest of the children, hence why these rooms seem custom designed visually for the game. And also, if Charlie did go out of his way to help these children, chances are they would stick along with the tour anyway. The Oompa Loompas sing a Bollywood song and dance routine calling Augustus Gloop a fat oaf idiot poo-poo head, and promise to save him. And the tour continues with the group heading down the deep, dark and mind-blowing chocolate tunnel, which is oddly gimped in this version compared to the original at least. The only things that really make it insane, I guess, are the visuals and Danny Elfman's reprise of the main theme. And none of that is in this game, which is quite bizarre to me. I feel like Digital Eclipse might have wanted to take the opportunity to homage some classic racing games or arcade games or whatever, but I suppose that was before that basically became their main export. Into the inventing room we go, and this time we're introduced to some quirkier mechanics. For example, Oompa Loompas can grab hold of balloons in order to reach higher platforms, as long as the platform above is a semi-solid. As well as that, we can fling Oompa Loompas to far off areas with the use of a seesaw. This is a decent mechanic, especially in theory, but the collision I find is a bit finicky, thanks in part to this game's vaguely isometric visuals. These mechanics I've just mentioned can come in handy in future levels. However, being the inventing room, I guess the devs figured this could be the experimental level where they throw all kinds of weird shit at the wall and see what sticks. For example, you have these grooming devices. In the movie there's this kind of throwaway joke about a failed experiment of Wonka's where he made a candy that would grow your hair faster. However, it led to one of the Oompa Loompas being drenched in enough hair to cover his whole body, making him an Oompa Loompa that should run a metal band. The game figured out how to turn that into a mechanic somehow. This, however, means that there's more than one of this guy unless his hair simply grows back that fast, and you figured out teleportation. I mean, to be fair, it seems Wonka did, he always ends up in front of you and ready with new information. You must use the B button to push a hairy Oompa Loompa into a grooming device, where he then becomes a regular Oompa Loompa. Most of the time though, you won't be able to reach the grooming device, so you'll have to fling them with a timed jump on the seesaw. This is kind of a waste of time. However, like I said before, just because something adds time to a game doesn't make it necessarily useless or dragging. It all depends on the flow. And I think this is worse than some of the earlier mechanics, if I'm being honest. We are also introduced to sneaking, which is used a few more times in this game. As well as that, we have to fix another machine, and when we do, we unlock magic jelly beans, similar to Jack and the Beanstalk. We give one to an Oompa Loompa when near a plant pot, and it grows into essentially a ladder for us to climb. It's a decent mechanic, however, it's nothing really that sets the world on fire. And I will say that I think most of the best mechanics were ones that were introduced in the earlier levels. So, that isn't to say though that this level doesn't have fun gimmicks. However, I'd argue that it's really nothing that stands out. However, with how much it introduces, it also introduces the problem that in order to fit all of this in, this level is really fucking long. This is sped up by 100 times my recording of this level, if any pause is cut. And here is the chocolate room at 100 times speed. I get it has a lot more going on and it's meant to rack your brain a bit, and honestly, the fact that it racks your brain a bit, shouldn't that make it a bit shorter? To give another example of a game that sort of shrinks the gameplay length for puzzles, look at Punch-Out on the NES. The major circuit basically acts like a list of puzzle fights, where essentially they introduce weirder mechanics and it's all to get you used to the harder fights. In that game, once you figure out the main weakness, essentially the fights end really quickly. Don Flamenco has that thing where you just have to alternate left and right punches and you've basically got him down. King Hippo goes down once and never comes back up. If you wither through Great Tiger's storm punches, you essentially get a free knockdown on him. And Bold Bull has that trick where if you wither the storm with the bull charge, you also get a free knockdown. The game is specifically shrunken in ways so that while it's racking your brain a bit more, it makes it easier on you because the levels themselves are smaller. This game doesn't seem to do that, and that can actually be really annoying, and it means that the inventing room, in my opinion, just drags out longer than it should. And oddly, I'd say this is the opposite problem that the film has. I feel like the film just rushes through this stuff. Similarly, the film has to cram in a lot, especially with the additions it makes to the story. However, I feel like then, a lot of the rooms just end up quickly. It just feels like you rush through them, like, introduce to a room, show some of it, child gets endangered, song and dance, move on. Like, let's take the inventing room. In the game it's long as shit, but in the film they look at maybe 2 inventions before they take a look at the Great Gun Machine, in which from that point onwards it whisks all the attention away as it leads to Violet's demise. Speaking of, after a little time with the Beanstalks, Mr. Wonka then finally shows off the Great Gum Machine, which produces a stick of gum that he boasts acts like a full 3-course meal. Yeah, of course, showing this in front of the world champion gum chewer, or whatever the hell that means. Yeah, of course she's gonna snatch that thing and start chewing it, no matter how much you try and protest it. So she chews away while tasting tomato soup, roast beef and blueberry pie, does her best Orbulon impression, and the next level... oh... well, she's seen better days. Yeah, it turns out there's actually something wrong with the blueberry pie. And for some reason, that malfunction equates to turning the chewer into a giant blueberry. But yeah, because video game, we have to be the ones to roll Violet to the juicing room. Whereas in the film, Oompa Loompas did it. Somewhat similarly to how the level where we chase Augustus down the river felt like a continuation and somewhat of a spin on the previous level, this level, called To the Juicing Room but apparently taking place in the juicing room, acts sort of like a spin on the inventing room, you could say. You could say this level is actually an escort mission technically, although honestly, unlike most escort missions, according to most people, I actually think it's quite fun. I think this level's actually much better than the inventing room. Yes, it is somewhat long as well, and towards the end I did start to feel a little fatigued, but honestly, for the last room, my attention and interest were piqued again. It does have enough of its own spin, I think, to warrant being a good level different enough from its previous one. It forgoes much of the slower mechanics of the previous level and instead reintroduces some of the hazards from the chocolate room. For example, chocolate geysers return, this time it's blueberry juice though. And honestly, with the context of this being the juicing room, plus all those stains on the floor as well, and the situation Violet's in, it's kind of disgusting. You do some more sneaking in one set piece that you repeat a few times. This level seems to focus quite a bit on Oompa Loompa puzzles, much like the last. However, maybe it's because I got in the rhythm with the last level, and also the fact that this is technically less stages to my memory. I don't think it's as painful, especially towards the end, because again, the last level is the most complex, yet it also somehow keeps me engaged. We also push Violet around as well on seesaws, pressure plates and whatnot, which is honestly quite cool, I think. I like the idea that they actually used one of the characters as more than just a damsel in distress or NPC, even if she is technically both, especially in the state she's in. Some of the NPCs don't seem to be taking this seriously at all though. Grandpa Joe is treating this like a day at the beach for some reason. Wonka is, I guess, taking it seriously, but still injecting his usual whimsy. Veruca seems totally nonplussed by the whole ordeal and is focusing on the square-eyed candy MacGuffins, and Mike actually admits to tampering with technology in the midst of trying to save a girl's life. Well, more like her livelihood and humanity, maybe. But still!
Wow, what an asshole!
Oh yeah, and I need to say this again, the visuals in this level are quite good, I think. Honestly, I could imagine this being in the film. The aesthetic matches a lot more, I think, especially with the sort of technical as science and brushed metal aesthetic that the inventing room went for in the movie. Anywho, once we make it to the juicer itself, we have another boss fight of sorts. And for some reason, Violet is really rolling around in there. And for some reason, we're inside with her too. We need to pull the lever down right as Violet rolls underneath the blue juicer. When she's caught, simply stand on the pressure plate and you'll see her being juiced. With no visible signs, though. The arena will shrink with each juicing and Violet will get faster until you've done it enough and the pounds just melt right off her.
3 easy payments of just $29.95. And if you call in the next 60 minutes, we'll take off one whole payment. You'll pay only 2 easy payments, but you must call within the next 60 minutes.
Then we get the obligatory late Oompa Loompa song. To be honest, this might be my least favourite of the Oompa Loompa songs nowadays, but I remember really liking it as a kid. I still like it now, of course. All the Oompa Loompa songs help shape my music taste, I'd say. And now we make it to the nuts room and... oh, that was fast. So let's check back on the movie. We take a look inside the nut room, which is full of squirrels. There they check the quality of the nut, and if it's bad they throw it down the central garbage chute. Of course, Veruca being Veruca, she wants one. Wonka won't budge and Mr. Salt isn't too persistent, but she is. Goes down, gets swarmed, turns out to be empty in the head, and is dumped into the garbage chute. Okay, you can't really make a level out of what is essentially just an observation deck in the movie. It's a very barren room with a central standout feature, plus it wouldn't make sense for Charlie to go down there. Maybe they could have had a free-falling level, but what we have coming up is close enough, I suppose. Now it's at this point we get a Beatles musical number, and probably my favourite song in the film. But again, video game, so Charlie must follow Veruca down the garbage chute to save her life. Yeah, I think this is one of the more matter of life or death situations, because there seems to be a garbage crusher, and according to the film, all garbage goes to the incinerator, which is only lit on Tuesdays, thankfully. And what day is today?
Tuesday.
Oh no, run! The ice physics from the first level return, yay! And they're not as bad as before though. I think this is because you need to be less accurate, which is weird considering the fact that a tutorial, if anything, that should trade off the difficulty and need for accuracy. I think it works here though because the trade-off is that you have to avoid more hazards in this one. Like these scrubbers which look like those Lego pieces they use for car washers. Actually another fun level I think. Not as long as the inventing room either, so thank fucking goodness. I will say this though, however, it is less visually appealing to me than the other custom rooms. Yeah, it sort of matches, I guess, the visual style of the original film, but I don't know, it just looks like a lot of brown to me. And a lot of brown is only really good when it's Ween or Steampunk. And this isn't really either, this is just a brown brick wall. Squirrels are the main enemy this time, and something quite cool about them is that you can bait them with nuts, because that's what they're trained to do. I think that's actually quite a cool and clever way, I think, to tie their purpose into the game. I didn't think much of it, but you do actually see them crack open the nut and test it in the animation, which is really cool, I think. This level can actually be decently difficult as well, especially with the squirrels, and why I didn't die. I think it does highlight one of the problems this game might have, especially for stages or other segments this long. There doesn't seem to be any checkpoints. In most levels, they're split into different stages or segments. When you die, you just get sent to the start of that segment. However, all of this level is on one screen, and it's rather long, so my biggest worry is that when low on health, you'll be more like, oh god, I have to replay this whole level again! And I can see this being a huge problem. Once we slide into the doorway, we then reach the garbage pipe, which doesn't really look a lot like a pipe if I'm being honest, where Veruca is running on a treadmill away from a crusher. Then in somewhat of a harder version of the Augustus fight, we then must throw rubbish into the compactor and hopefully fill it up enough so that it'll be disabled or something. This time, however, there's a squirrel in our way. You can just walk under them with timing, however occasionally the pipes will drop nuts that you can bait them with. So you save her, cue the belated Oompa Loompa poem, and away we go. Next is the fizzy lifting room. This is somewhat of a deviation from the film now. The fizzy lifting room is not in the film at all. It was in the book to my memory, and it was before the nut room in the 1971 movie. Sadly, however, this is another long level, and worse, another long puzzle level too. Thankfully though, I don't think it's as bad as the inventing room. I think it did have those puzzles though, where it's like, if you don't know what to do with them, it becomes really boring. However, the moment that you figure out what to do, it actually becomes really fun. Please say I'm not the only one who actually feels that about some games sometimes. It happened a few times in my first playthrough of Valve games. There's another fix the machine puzzle, and this time it seems to stick you on this linearish path of a single Oompa Loompa you must guide to help you grab different parts. It's fine enough when you figure it out, but if you muck up or do something out of order, you have to fling the Oompa Loompa down to the bottom platform from the very top and then go through the whole process again to catch up with where you left off. It's not too long or bad, I suppose, but I could see how this could end up pissing somebody off, and it was kind of annoying for me. Despite these problems, it does introduce some mechanics that are enjoyable. Not as many as before, but the machine does produce exploding candy, which you can destroy company property with. Speaking of said company property, you meet a new enemy in the form of the scrubber bots. Times levers are introduced which deactivate after a time limit has been reached, leading to some of the first few stages essentially being speedrun levels. There's also this really cool section where you need to time the lever to crush an enemy blocking your path. It doesn't really add too much, I just think it's a really cool set piece. But the main attraction is of course the fizzy lifting drinks. Grab it and you'll float in the air for a few seconds. Burping with the B button makes you descend. Press L to make Oompa Loompas burp so they stop floating and you can use them like normal. Just like the grooming machine, except a lot less painful because it's not as long or tedious, I don't think, after a while. Overall, the level's a bit of a drag, but I don't see anything too wrong with it. Plus, I think this is another good example of this game's art direction. This is another room I think fits very well into the Burton vision for the factory. This is technically the last custom room made for the game now, as we're generally now on the same track as the movie. Now we reach the television room, and just like before, we skip most of the actual touring and we see Mike act like an idiot. Now in the book, he's portrayed as a bit more of a dimwit who gets overly excited at the idea of being sent through television. But in the movie, it's his stubbornness. I mean, he raises a good point that Wonka invented basically a teleporter, which is potentially a very useful invention, yet only really uses it for transporting chocolate bars. But we literally see the fact it shrunk a giant Wait a second, what? Oh come on, so what's the fucking point of owning both of these films? You know, there's a lot of people that say 2001 is the best film of all time, but clearly they haven't seen this film, because in this one you get two for the price of one, Grandma. Oh, sorry, but anyway. But we literally see the fact it shrunk a giant chocolate bar down to size, and he has seen what happened to the other children who disobeyed Wonka to such a degree and incorrectly used his technology or creations, yet he goes ahead anyway. I get the idea is that he's too caught up in his anger and thinking he's smarter, but again, and because video game, we need to help Wonka secure a signal to see Mike on the television, so we have another sort of Oompa Loompa puzzle level. However, thank God this is much shorter than the others. I'm guessing because it really doesn't introduce any new features. The problem with this, however, it's only one screen again, so you probably don't want to die. This level is probably about 10 minutes worth of gameplay. You don't want to repeat all of that. The Oompa Loompas finally get new designs as well, which is cool. They've been wearing the generic red costumes, however throughout the movie, the Oompa Loompas in different rooms of the factory each wear different coloured costumes. I'm guessing sort of like colour-coded uniform? And they finally catch up with the film in that regard in this level. There is another fix the machine puzzle right after the last, which honestly is really annoying. However, I'm gonna be honest, this is much better because you only have to include 3 ingredients, and those are to secure a signal on the television. Secure a signal for a video game? I would joke that maybe they're streaming from the Sega channel, but this is 2005 and already somewhat late for that. Maybe it could be streaming from online? I don't know, I was under the impression that we were tuning it like a television, and that's the impression I get from the static as well.
Mumbler!
But pedantic technology rant aside, that's it for the main levels. That's right, that's the last true main level. From now on it's weird gimmick levels, starting with the television maze. You must guide Mike through these mazes, keeping enemies away from him, turning these arrows, which change the directions of anything that's touching them, and if you need them, grabbing 1-ups. This can actually be quite a challenge, I think, especially with the lives capping off at 9 and Mike dying in one hit. I lost about half my lives by the end of the minigame. This minigame does feel like something Digital Eclipse would do. Feels very Atari for some reason, mostly in the graphics. Mike looks very much like Pitfall Harry or Bit Trip Runner, and the enemies look like they're from Berserk. But then we save Mike, presumably his father grabs him, and then we get our last Oompa Loompa teaching, which is rather late compared to the movie. For Mike, the Oompa Loompas practically abuse his tiny corpse while shouting out loud the most Oingo Boingo soundtrack of the song. They even drop the line TV set, or rather television set, into the song. But Mike and his father are whisked away, and so now the final level, over the town. And as it turns out, surprise, surprise, only Charlie is left. So by default, although likely this is how it was meant to be decided anyway, he's won the secretive grand prize most of the tour seem to care for, which is ownership of the factory. Yippee! Likely responsibility for all the legal fees too.
Whoops.
But mostly the factory. We don't know that quite yet in the movie though, so shush. However, in sync with the movie, Wonka decides to take us home while doing something he's always wanted to do. Smash a giant hole in his roof. And before you know it, we're handed control of the Great Glass Elevator, flying in the sky, after some tutorial text. Unfortunately, we don't see what happens to the other children as they're leaving like in the movie. I mean, we kinda did before, I suppose. But we don't know what happened to Mike, we never see him again in game. In the movie though, oh Jesus fucking Christ. He's just like that modern art from The World's End, or Flat Stanley. Get him away, Jesus Christ. But best not to dwell on our mistakes. It's time we fly in the skies where people let off fireworks in daylight for some reason. It is a pretty basic and rather easy segment, just dodge anything that isn't sky for the most part, and collect sweets you see in the sky to refill your fuel gauge. However, you seemingly can overfill the limit, because after I collected a few, the gauge never seemed to decrease. You go through what is, I assume, a tunnel at one point, and then you see Charlie's house. Simply fly towards it, Mach 10 at sudden speed, then... No, they're safe, and Charlie tells them all the good news that he's won the factory. Charlie then says if his family can't come with him, he's not going, and Wonka accepts... Wait a minute, they cut a huge chunk of this story out. Yes, something I haven't mentioned yet, due to not really being referenced much in the game. Tim Burton added a whole extra storyline to the movie, which probably helps contribute to the factory tour feeling a little rushed at times, since we do spend a lot of the time, usually just after losing one of the children. dwelling in Wonka's flashbacks about his rocky relationship with his father. His father was a dentist and sold chocolate and candies as plagues. But of course, Wonka being Wonka, was passionate about them, which caused them to grow distant rather quickly, to the point of him literally abandoning his son brick for brick. Of course, Wonka grows to success, however throughout the movie we see he really doesn't like the idea of family or parents. So after all is said and done, Charlie actually rejects Wonka's offer if it means abandoning his family. But things look up for Charlie and his family, but they look down for Wonka. They bump into each other while Charlie shines shoes. Charlie takes him to his father so that they can make amends, and it turns out his father still cared for his son. Even having a wall dedicated to recording his son's successes, he figures out that his patient is his son, and they make amends. Apparently this whole plotline was inspired by Burton's own life experience with his parents who he felt too different from. And one day when visiting his dying mother, he found out that she had posters of his movie hanging up on her walls. Both his parents seem to die roughly around the same time, and both this film and Big Fish especially feel like his personal tributes to each of them, which is incredibly heartwarming and beautiful, especially as usually he writes films from the perspective of how he felt growing up, a perspective where you feel different and unique. And in a way, these films seem more self-reflective than the others and look at his perspective from a third party. I get why the game skipped it, especially as it gives you a reason to watch the movie, even if it's not the meat and potatoes of the plot. But still, the way the ending words things makes it sound like all of that stuff happened and they just neglected to mention it. Which they technically do, I suppose. But it just feels out of place. But happy endings and all, life has never been sweeter than the game and movie both end with the Bucket household now moved into the factory. So overall, the main game is actually surprisingly fun and decently crafted. Usually you get the equivalent of skid marks when it comes to these licensed games, but I'm guessing because devs usually don't really give a shit about this stuff, or they usually do it for a paycheck, at least that's what I'd assume. Or fast approaching deadlines of course, because usually they used to release these alongside films. But I'm guessing due to the hands this game was in, it turned out quite fun. Does it set the world on fire? No, I wouldn't say that at all. And yes, it does have some problems, including some moments that it feels like were dragged out, but overall I'd say a complete playthrough is a decent time. I'd say it might actually be worth getting it if you care for the source material or just want to grab some Game Boy Advance games. Honestly though, most of the fun from this game comes from the flow of it all, because replaying levels in isolation, at least to me, the fun factor just kind of melts away. This is probably in part because the game commits a cardinal sin in that when you grab a collectible, it completely disappears. So essentially if you've grabbed most or all of the collectibles in a stage, it's essentially just a beeline to the goal, which especially in the longer stages, for me, at least makes them unplayably unfun. If you're going to play through this game's story, I'd say do somewhat commit to it. The game is short enough, I think, that you can play it in a single session, if you care that much. About 2 hours long, I think. Probably about how long this review is or how long the length of the script is compared to my last one. No, seriously, I've been editing this as I've been recording it. Surprisingly, I got 30 minutes with like 8 pages. I've been going through these pages I think a lot faster than I did my Crazy Taxi review, which is actually really surprising to me. That said, you don't have to play it all in one go. However, I'd say if you don't get all the collectibles, honestly, if you can't be bothered to find the rest you're missing, you may as well just not bother with them. I don't think it's worth it most of the time. Or maybe you could just try again in a new file to bring back the flow of things. Oh yeah, and be sure to change the difficulty. By default, it seems that the game sets itself to easy, or I'm guessing it's easy. It commits another cardinal sin of naming the difficulties relatively ambiguous phrases to be cute. Before I give my final rating, I think I'll gloss over the bonus minigames you unlock quickly. I don't have all of them, but I have unlocked most. First is Liftle, and basically just pull Oompa Loompas out the river of fudge apparently. I'm guessing not the same river Augustus fell in, and drop them on a number, which indicates how many points you'll get if you land the Oompa Loompa there. It's mostly quite easy. You can slip up of course if your timing gets buggered, but there's no real challenge to the scores. To be honest, the easy difficulty complaint carries over to pretty much every other minigame. A particular bad example being Blueberry Jam. You know how Violet turned into a giant blueberry? Well, Wonka offhand comments that it's happened to about 20 Oompa Loompas before her. I don't think Mr. Wonka can count. You need to catch blueberry Oompa Loompas as they fall. I don't know if there was a chemical leak or something, but it seems there's a metric fuck ton of Oompa Loompas who are being sent off to being juiced. You can't just catch anything that falls out of the pipe, however. Yes, there might be an extra life instead of an Oompa Loompa, but squirrels can also pop out and catching them loses a life. Too bad they're quite easy to avoid most of the time. Yeah, it can get quite hard as it gets super fast, but this is probably the easiest. This is probably the hardest to lose without reaching that point. I feel maybe this would have been a better challenge if it was more like Game & Watch Fire, but overall it is a decently fun mini game when it speeds up, even if it is overly easy. Next is Nut Room Chaos. Simply throw the nuts to the squirrels who wait, but watch out for the scrubberbots who always seem to jump in front of the squirrels at the worst times imaginable. If anything, this is probably a game to test your patience. Don't just blindly throw nuts at squirrels who come up as soon as, because 1, that's rude and animal abuse, and 2, a scrubberbot is likely going to get in the way after you've thrown it or before you can react. This one's kind of boring if I'm being honest. And the last one of the ones I've unlocked, Chocolate Broadcast, essentially a Puzzle Bubble clone, but with chocolate instead of coloured bubbles. It is Puzzle Bubble, so it's fun, but I find the physics are a little unpractical. It feels like sometimes the chocolate stops where you wouldn't expect it to. The overall experience just isn't as smooth as the real thing in my opinion. Reaching stage 4 does spice it up however by removing the guidance. I'd rather it not though. I don't know if Puzzle Bubble does this. I've only really played the Super Nintendo version, and the last time I did was ages ago, and I never got too far in it anyway, I don't think. So from what I see, no it didn't. I guess it's a good way if you want some variety to add some, but if you really want a harder Puzzle Bubble experience, I wouldn't buy this game for it. You do unlock it rather late into the story. I don't have shipping and receiving, so can't really comment on it. So with all that done, would I recommend this game? Well, like I said, it's not a particularly special game. There are plenty of other better games, including GBA platformers, but if you want something new, like the source material or whatever, yeah, I'd say it's good. I don't feel qualified enough to give a numbered score, so from now on I'll do thumbs, and I give this game a thumbs up. Yeah, stealing from Siskel and Ebert now, it's not my fault they own the right to thumbs. But as I head off, I leave you with some closing words. Why does nobody like both film adaptations? Yeah, for some reason every time I see somebody praise one adaptation, they completely despise the existence of the other. Oftentimes their one is the genuine one, while the other one is a corporate piece of crap meant to make money and that's all. But then both sides are right because 1, why would a studio make a film that doesn't make them any money? And besides, just because a film is corporate doesn't mean it's bad automatically, it just usually does! Good night.
We've also had a naked, asexual man up a stick watching some pornography. Have you reached any conclusions?